Hello, and welcome to the Sandbox Cooperative. It is good to see all of you here in the house and all of you joining us online. Here at the Sandbox Cooperative, we are looking to knock down walls with curiosity and conversation. So no matter where you are on the faith and life spectrum, know that you are not alone, and we are so glad that you are here. Today we welcome Professor Jacqueline Bussie, who will be joining us a little later. We look forward to learning from her and hearing from her. Don't forget to check out the Sandbox Cooperative podcast. We continue to curate conversations about life and faith and curiosity, and it runs twice a month. It's available through iTunes or whatever your favorite podcast app is, so make sure to check that out. Sandbox Cooperative is also a resource that is completely supported through grants and financial gifts. So if you would like to support us, you can make a financial gift by hitting the Donate tab on our website. Finally, a quick word about our format. Jacqueline will present during the first part of our time together, and then we will have a Q&A time for all of those who are here, as well as those who are in our online audience. And so for more about our online offerings, we'll throw it to Chris.
Thanks, Gary. For those viewing online, you can ask questions and join in the conversation in a few ways. You can join us on the Sandbox Cooperative Facebook and Twitter feeds. Use the hashtag SandboxCoop, or if you're watching on live stream, you can use the on-screen chat box. Just submit your questions for Jacqueline, and we'll do our best to get through them throughout the evening. Also, if you're viewing online, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to know where you're at. Check in on Facebook, Twitter, or use that live stream chat. If you are viewing online, be sure to engage each other and keep the conversation going in the comments. We'd love to hear from you throughout the night. And with that, here's Dave.
Here's Dave. Hey everybody, how you doing? So good to have everybody here in-house and people watching online. It's my honor to be able to introduce Dr. Jacqueline Busty. She's an award-winning author, professor, theologian, and public speaker. Dr. Busty is the director of the Forum on Faith and Life at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, where she teaches religion, theology, and interfaith studies. Jacqueline is also the author of several books, most recently this one, Love Without Limits, Jesus' Radical Vision for Love with No Exceptions. It was just released this past August. In her free time, Jacqueline loves to read books, ride in the front cars of roller coasters, take ballroom dance lessons with her husband, travel, go for long walks, laugh, the band Bon Iver, the smell of honeysuckle on a hot day. I don't even know what honeysuckle smells like, but that sounds fantastic. She also loves her husband's fajitas. Jacqueline hails from Florida. She now lives in Fargo, North Dakota, which is all the proof she needs that God has a wicked sense of humor. Welcome, Dr. Jacqueline Busty.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dave, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to the Sandbox Cooperative for having me out tonight, and most of all, thanks to those listening, and thank you to you beautiful humans who gave up your Sunday night to be here. So it means a lot to me. So I look forward to the conversation that we're going to have together, so be thinking of questions you want to talk to me about. My book has a very interesting backstory. It's a backstory from censorship to redemption, so I look forward to talking to you about that. But rather than me just telling you what the book is about, I thought that I would do a reading, if that's okay, with everyone. Do a short reading of the very first chapter of the book, which is about my first love. Do you remember your first love, what it taught you? Mine was my very first lesson in a love without limits, and I was never the same. My first love was Gus Tate, whose swing set loosely separated my unfenced backyard from his in Peachtree City, Georgia. I was 6 years old. Gus was 4. I was a girl. He was a boy. I was Lutheran. He was Catholic. I went to school. Gus stayed home. On the block, the kids teased, "Ew, he's too little to play with." And at church, they said, "Ew, his church is bad and teaches the wrong stuff." And for these silly reasons, everyone said Gus and I couldn't be best friends. But thankfully, we never let that stop us. Gus and I spent hours together every day. Our shared love for SpaghettiOs, playing outside, and the book Bedknobs and Broomsticks, drowning out all the voices that tried to keep us apart. Gus's dad worked for a big company in Atlanta. He always left the house early, so we didn't see him much, just like my dad. And Gus's mom, Margaret, was as sweet as could be. And just like my mom, she fed us cut-up apple slices and Kool-Aid, but always with less sugar added than the back of that packet recommended. And unlike the rest of the world, Gus and I realized how much we had in common, which made our love as shatterproof as our sippy cups. Gus and I turned up our noses at store-bought games, like Tiddlywinks or Cootie, in favor of our own invented game called Imagination, our favorite version of which we called Magic Carpet. The game required only a fuzzy blue bath mat and an old little tube, which, although it said Crest on it, actually should have said Magic, duh, grown-ups. And to play, Gus and I sat on the little carpet, and I unscrewed the cap off the tube. Next, we held hands and wished as hard as we could for liftoff. And once airborne, eyes closed, we imagined our way across the world. Look, that's the roof of our house down there. And this must be what Mary Poppins feels like. I swear sometimes that bath mat really did lift a few inches off the linoleum. And when the carpet grew tired, or more likely, when Margaret said it was time for supper, we opened our eyes and landed. The tube always went back home with me in my pocket, but only until the next time Gus begged me to uncap it. And there was always a next time. And one sad day, I lost the tube. But to our delight, Gus and I found it made no difference. The only magic we needed to fly was each other. Once, in the woods, behind our backyards, we discovered a huge fire ant pile. And Margaret told us the true story of a toddler who stepped into a pile of Georgia fire ants and died of allergic shock. The story frightened me, but it also filled me with a sense of big girl responsibility. I knew I had to protect Gus from the scary piles of red dirt because underneath them lurked 1,000 sneaky ants that could sting the life out of him in a second. Time with Gus taught me that you have to look out for everyone who is littler than yourself, and that protecting people from things that sting is what love looks like. Even though I was only a little kid, Margaret loved and trusted me, and somehow I knew this. I see now that I was, in some ways, a helpful babysitter to her during a tough time in her life. But that doesn't change a thing about my gratitude. Gus was kind and sweet, and he let me teach him stuff that he didn't know how to do, like read books, tie his shoes, and brush his teeth. In my own family, I was the littlest, which felt like the stupidest. But with Gus, I felt smart and special. Gus was the first person in my life who made me feel like a someone, like the teacher I would one day become. And on what went down in my personal history as the worst day of my childhood, all of this goodness came to a wailing halt. And a few weeks before my 7th birthday, Gus and Margaret moved to Kansas. Now, I had no idea where Kansas was. But like every little kid, I had watched The Wizard of Oz. So I knew Kansas was a nightmarish place, far from your family and filled with cyclones and mean green witches, flying monkeys. I could not for the life of me understand why Gus had to go there. So I asked my mom, and she said that Gus was moving because his parents had gotten a divorce. Now, I had no idea what divorce was, but because it meant that Gus was leaving town forever and I could no longer walk out my back door and see his face, I rightly understood the D word to stand for separation, tears, and never again being able to play on the swing set with the boy I loved. The day Gus left town, I stared out my window at the moving van. I cried the entire day. I couldn't stop. This continued for days. No one in my family paid me any attention. They all thought I would get over it. And in one way, they were right, of course. But in another way, they were dead wrong, as evidenced by the fact that I'm still standing here talking about him decades later. A month or so after Gus moved, I wrote him a letter on my yellow-lined monogrammed stationery, which he'd sent me for my 7th birthday. And I wrote, "I miss you so much, Gus. I will never smile again." I was a very dramatic kid. This was overly dramatic, I know. But today I'm struck by how much this reaction foretold about my life and revealed who I really am deep down. You know, grief has always stung my soul like 1,000 Georgia fire ants swarming my skin. It has always left me shocked, gasping for air, and terrified of dying all alone in the woods. Now, I could lie to you and swear that one day I outgrew this allergic reaction to absence. But honestly, I never did. Like all grown-ups, I just learned how to hide it. Now, as you might imagine, my letter troubled Margaret. She and Gus wrote me back. Well, Gus couldn't write yet, so she had to speak for him. "Jackie," she penned, "Gus was so sad to hear you say you'll never smile again. He wants you to play and be happy. He wants you to know he will never forget you." And I still have this letter. I have kept it for 40 years. I just realized I should have brought it tonight. That would have been a great prop to show. I really have it. I'm not kidding. But I never saw Gus Tate again. But for the next 20 years, we wrote letters. Each year, I sent him my school picture with my red-headed curly hair and my pale, freckled face, smiling at him from across the miles, proof that I'd broken my grim promise. And Gus sent me drawings, Valentine's, a notice of his first communion, school pictures. I grew up with pictures of Gus all around me, on my bedroom desk. And I was told Gus grew up with pictures of me on his fridge. I always felt better when I heard this, because my greatest fear was that Gus would forget me. And the saddest thing I could imagine was standing in my backyard all alone, the only one left holding the memory of how marvelous it felt to make liftoff. As sometimes happens with time, the letters trickled to a slow drip, then stopped altogether. The very last thing Gus ever sent me in the early 90s was his wedding photo. Gus stood outside on the grass in front of some lush green trees, and he wore a tuxedo, and I was struck by how much he looked like his dad. However, what took my breath away in the photo was not Gus's face, but the face of his bride. She had red, curly hair and freckles all over her pale skin. And looking at the face of Gus Tate's wife felt like looking in a mirror. She looked more like me than my own sister. Even my mother said so. Gus Tate is the person who taught me that real love never forgets, even if it has to move to canvas and you never ever see it again. Gus Tate is the person who taught me that real love hurts you, but it can also heal you. Our first love teaches you the power of certain things: magic, flight, stings, separation, words. And if you're one of the lucky ones, you'll never forget its lessons. I am lucky. I never forgot. At age 6, I could never have known how divided our world and even our own nation and neighborhoods would one day become, how sad and severed. I could never have imagined the countless times I would hear someone say or act as if certain groups of thems or certain kinds of theys must never be loved or befriended because they are too different. I could never have foreseen how many times my heart would return to the memory of my minutes with little Gus Tate, and how, because of him and our magic, to this day, I distrust voices that claim it's wrong or dangerous or unfaithful to love someone because they are not one of us. I could never have fathomed the gratitude my grown-up self would still carry today for my childhood friend. For Gus Tate was the one who taught me to tear down the foolish fences this world tries to construct in our backyards. He was the one who taught me, sure, differences and distance, they matter. But everyone, yes, everyone wants to fly. This is a book about love's legacy, about the likely and unlikely people, places, and things that have in my years on earth showed me how to love with a radical love. Always be ready to give an accounting of the hope that is within you. 1 Peter 3:15. This book is my heart on the page, giving you an accounting of the love that lives within me. This is a book about love, love without limits, about the kind of outlandish love that outfoxes death, difference, and distance, about all the people and places and things that you're taught not to love, and why loving them anyway might just save your life, as well as stop the madness that currently passes for our daily news headlines. This is a book about a love so strong-legged, its leap crosses canyons. About a love so long-armed, its embrace makes room for you and for all your hidden grief too. It's about a challenge to widen love's wingspan or die trying. This is not a book about the tiny love fear teaches us to follow, fit for ants. It's about the Goliath love God begs us to borrow, fit for giants. It's about the radical love to which we are called and the surprising places it will take us if we are just brave enough to believe and hold hands. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you. I think we're going to go to Chris for for a moment.
All right, well, we're going to start the Q&A portion of the evening. I think there's maybe a couple other things that will be shared throughout this. But as we're going through, again, if you're joining us online, make sure to share those questions with us through the live stream chat or through any of the social media channels that we've got using that hashtag SandboxCoop. Send it back your way.
All right, thanks. Well, thanks, Jacqueline, for sharing the first chapter of your book. And we've had some conversations kind of leading up to this, and you described this book as being a book with a story, with a background. Could you share about that?
I can. Yeah, it's actually kind of an unfortunate backstory, but it has a great ending, as you can tell by the fact the book exists. So basically what happened was this was a book that was written entirely during the election year. So I was in contract to write this book for a major Christian publishing house. I won't name them, but I'm sure it's one that you have definitely heard of. And I gave a full proposal, what I was going to be doing, and they signed off on it. They loved it, and they gave the book this title. That's important for later for this story. So the subtitle is Jesus' Radical Vision for Love with No Exceptions. And basically what happened is I was asked to make exceptions. So I wrote the whole book and submitted it, and my editor loved it. He said, oh, we love it, it's great, and there's just something we need to talk to you about on the phone. And foolishly, I was like, oh, okay, well, no problem. It seems like they liked it so much, I wasn't worried. And I got on the phone, and I'm going to quote exactly what he said to me. He said, well, there's just, some of the stories you're telling, they're just not in line with the values of the majority. And I was like, well, okay, well, which stories? And also, I'm not sure that I care, right? Because these are, this is a memoir about love across difference, and it comes from my own life and those, wonderful people who have allowed me to be a steward and share their stories in the book and given me permission to do that. And so I was like, okay, well, what are you talking, like what? And he goes, and I'm quoting, he said, it's the gays and the Muslims. And I said, what? And instantly my hands were shaking, and I was like, what about them? And he was like, well, he just kept repeating that line about, well, some of the stories you're telling aren't in line with the values of the majority. And he said, well, I said, well, I don't understand, like, which stories are you talking about? I don't understand this. And then he said, well, we have taken the liberty of rewriting it, so we'll send it to you. And just so you know, like, that's not how editing books goes, right? I mean, of course you know that, right? But the way it works, and it has always worked with all, this is my third book, is that it's a back and forth, it's a dialogue, they write in the track changes in the document, like, hey, you need to work on this part, it needs more strengthening, and then you do it. People don't rewrite that for you without even doing track changes, and that's what they did. And they sent it to me. And that's when I knew that it was over. And I should just preface this too by saying that I had taken a year off of my work at Concordia in order to write the book for this publisher. So I was not working. I was working for this publisher, and they had paid me a large advance to write the book. So it's more complicated than it seems, when money changes hands, And so they took the liberty of rewriting it. And they sent it to me, and I was just terrified. And the phone call did not go well. I kept trying to say to them, I was like, I'll look at what you wrote, but I'm worried about it. I said, I don't expect that it's going to go well. And I was trying to make an argument with them that I'm a teacher, and that my identity as a teacher really matters to me. And my editor at the time actually was a teacher of writing. And so I tried to appeal to that with him, and I said, if your writing students came to you on the first day of class and they wrote a certain way, and 16 weeks later they wrote exactly the same way, and you'd given them no new information, no new challenges, no new perspectives, you hadn't opened any worlds of writing to them, would you consider yourself a failure? I said, because that's the way I feel about my book. And even if people don't agree with it, I want this perspective to be out there. I want people to be introduced to a new idea, and that's what I would want for my students. And so part of this is wrapped up in this. I have a whole chapter on some of my Muslim friends, and I use that as an on-ramp to not only introduce readers to them because they're beautiful human beings, but also to teach a few things about Islam that maybe we all don't know, right? That goes beyond the media sound bites, which is all we have these days. And so back to the tale of woe. So I open up my laptop, they've sent the document, and I take one look at it and start sobbing, like wailing. My husband comes running up the stairs. He's like, "What is it? What is it?" And I push the laptop over to him, and I say these words. I said, "You know, honey, there's only one choice," which meant that I was going to have to quit, you know, back out of my own contract. And the reason for that was, what they had done was I had a chapter in which I'm talking about some of my LGBTQ friends and some beautiful things that they had taught me about love, and then I had a chapter about my Muslim friends. Like I said, the cuts were so intense, it was almost 4,000 words. It's a short book. That's a lot. That's almost a whole chapter. The cuts were so intense that what the editor did, the publisher, combined those two chapters that were named after my friends, had the names of human beings, of people that I love, right? One was called Elijah, and then one had the names of 3 Muslim friends. But they cut so much from the chapters that the chapters couldn't stand up, right, as a whole chapter. So they combined them into one, which makes no sense, right, you know? And they couldn't call it after the names anymore, so they entitled the chapter in all capital letters. Are you ready? I'm glad you're sitting down. I hope at home you're sitting down too. They called it Others. And my heart just broke, you know, because I was like, the whole point of writing the book is so that we stop seeing beloved children of God as others. And that's why I cried, and that's why I pushed the laptop to my husband and I said, you know, there's only one choice. And it's proof that he's an amazing spouse, because he said, he took one look at it, just that one line, that new title of the chapter, and he's like, yeah, there's only one choice. So.
And then what? I mean, I'm like.
I know, exactly. So this is where I get in a lot of trouble, right? Because I told, you know, I said to my agent, I said, you have to tell them that I'm not going to do it. Yeah. And you can also tell them one of my favorite quotes from the philosopher Cornel West. I don't know if you know him, but he came to MSUM, and my students and I from Concordia, we walked over and we listened to him. And we were completely inspired. And one of the things that we all like gave him a standing ovation for was he'd said this sentence. He said, "What the world needs more of are people who are not for sale." And I had quoted that, and my students were like, "I love that quote," you know. And then it's interesting, you know, watch out what you love, because someday the universe might test you on it, because that's what happened to me. And so I said, you tell them, tell my publisher that Cornel West said, what the world needs more of is people who aren't for sale, and you tell them I'm one of them. And so then, of course, they said, well, okay, well, that's just fine. You don't have to make the changes. You know, they were like, you can still make the changes and we'll publish the book, which they really wanted to do. And then they, you know, but they said, if you refuse, which you're refusing, they said, that's fine. Then Jacqueline owes us back her entire annual salary that we paid her for the last year, because we own the rights to the book, because we paid her to write it. Now, imagine if you worked for a year, nobody told you did a bad job. In fact, I'd sent chapters to the publisher. They had read them. They weren't maybe those controversial ones, because those were done towards the end, but they had read them. I mean, imagine if you worked for a year and then at the end your boss was like, you know, I've been thinking about it and I changed my mind about what I wanted, and so now you have to give me your annual salary back. Like, it may be legal, but I was like, this is completely unethical. You agreed to this book. And we pushed them on that. And then they sent us an email in which the vice president said, well, the landscape is very different now. I don't know what that means exactly, but we could think about it, because we could think about it together in theory, right? Because the book was approved, you know, in the fall of 2016, which is all an election year, and it was due to the publisher on April 30th of 2017. I got it in a few days early. But in that span of time, what we had agreed to was no longer acceptable. And again, you know, you can't force a publisher to publish something they don't want to publish, but you also can't force me. I'm protected by the law as well. You know, as an author, you can't put my name on a book that I'm saying you can't publish that version of it. So we're both mutually protected, but we didn't have the money. I mean, I don't know about you, but what you do with an annual salary is you live off of it. Mm-hmm. My husband's a freelancer, you know. We lived off that money, and they knew I wouldn't have it. So I lost the book. I lost the rights to the book. I could have, I mean, I don't think Concordia would do this, but, you know, I could be in a lot of trouble for Concordia. Part of when you go on a sabbatical as a professor is you need to produce something that is a reflection, you know, of my office. I direct a forum on faith and life. I write on faith and life. You don't just go on a vacation for a year from your job, right? So I could be in a lot of trouble with Concordia for not having the book come out, and I sank into a depression. I got really, really depressed because they were very shaming in my perception. They tried shaming, they tried silencing, they tried what I call seduction. You know, my publisher was like, it's okay, Jacqueline, that you have these views. You know, it's okay, and you can like just publish those somewhere else, like your blog, but not in your books. Listen to that, right? And then I get to keep the money, right? Wow, the things that you're asked to do, right, to compromise your integrity. So obviously I didn't do any of that.
They must not have been aware of the title of the book?
Yeah. I'm still left wondering about, I was like, do you not see the irony of the no exceptions? Yeah. They asked me to make exceptions. Wow.
And so you pull out of that, and you and your husband, you make this decision. Yeah. And you don't have the money to pay back. Nope. You're experiencing a depression. Mm-hmm. And yet I'm sitting here with you, and there's a book sitting here. How did that come to be? Yeah.
This is the best part. You're totally gonna love this, because it's like, love wins. So wins. So it was Memorial Day weekend when we told them that I would not make the changes and we were done. And they fired me. Well, it was 4 days before the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend. And they fired me on Memorial Day weekend. Like, the vice president actually wrote us on a holiday weekend to be like, she's out. And so I was like, we expected that, of course, but it was still really depressing. So, like I said, I lost myself a little bit, because of course these were friends, these are friends, you know, the stories that I had told. They're sacred stories. You know, if somebody allows you to share their story in such a public way, you become a steward of that. And to me, that's a sacred obligation. And, so do you think I could go back to my friends and be like, oh, hey, I lost my book contract because I felt like I couldn't even tell them. I felt like I've just kind of hunkered down into this. I don't know who I can talk to about this, so I told very few people. But in about 2 months passed, and there's all kinds of like sad stories. You know, I went walking one day in a cemetery because I felt like I gave birth to death. That's what it felt like, you know, to put your whole being into writing. My whole heart is in this book. Like, it's my whole life. It's my celebration of love across difference. And to have it stomped on like that was just, So, to say nothing of just what I perceive as the bigotry, right? And the bias behind it, which of course has very little to do with the book, right? So it's really much bigger. Like, you know, my depression was not just about the book, just to be clear, or myself or money, for heaven's sake. It's about my naivete was destroyed, like my innocence. Like, I learned that this is how books get printed, and that every expectation is that you'll just change it. And this is how single stories get told about whole groups of people in the world, and how heartbreaking that is. And this is how stereotypes live on and on and on. Okay, so back to what happened. Sorry. I just talked for a long time. I promise I'll keep it short. So here's the beautiful thing that happened. So one day, I was talking to this dear friend of mine, and she's just a beautiful person. And you know how sometimes one person will say something to you, and after all the things that didn't get through, that one thing just like pierces right through to your heart? She did that. This is what she said. It was July 21st. So I lost the contract Memorial Day. She said, you know, Jacqueline, they just want you to shut up and disappear. And you have given them exactly what they wanted. Now, who can say what they wanted? I don't want to speculate about that. But what I can tell you is that is exactly what I did. And that made me realize the feisty part of myself kicked in. You know, the feisty Southerner in me was like, what? I gave these people exactly what they wanted? That's not okay. So I walked home. This is where we have the props, right? Okay. So I walked home and I said to my husband, where's the duct tape? And he was like, it's right here. Why do you want the duct tape, honey? It was like really scaring him. And I took out a black Sharpie and I wrote censored across the tape. And then I took this selfie, which is me like looking really bad because I was feeling actually really, really bad and hadn't slept for like weeks. So anyway, this is the picture that I took, and I decided that I was gonna sit down and along with this picture, I was going to write a Facebook post just for once and for all to tell my friends what had happened so I didn't have to keep retelling it and crying, you know. So I just wrote a little piece. I did not name my publisher. I'm not interested in demonizing them. Not interested in that. My love without limits extends even to them. So, but I did like come to this uncanny conclusion at the end when I was writing it. This is gonna sound so silly because I'm sure you're thinking like, you know, they didn't take everything, Jacqueline. At the time it felt like that to me. But the writing for me is prayer. So the writing helped me to recover, of course, as I got to the end. The one thing that they did not take, of course, was my love. They didn't take it. There would be no controversy if they had taken it. And so I just wrote this little piece, and at the end, the last sentence that came out as I was writing was, you know, okay, people in power, huff and puff, you know, till what is true will turn your face blue. And then I wrote, love's not a candle, it's the freaking sun. Like, you can't blow it out. Good luck trying. And then I posted that on Facebook with this picture, right? And then I went to bed because I was like, oh, it just felt so good to tell it. And I was so tired. It was middle of the day. And so I went to sleep. But right before I went to sleep, somebody said, will you make this post public so that I could share it? And I'm like, sure, whatever, right? You know where this is headed, right? And so while I'm resting, the post goes viral. And people that I did not even know started tagging the CEOs of other publishing houses. And this amazing woman in California, I hope she's listening. I've never met her yet, but I can't wait to meet her. I have a speaking gig in California. I'm going to get to meet her. But she tagged the CEO of Fortress Press, which is, you know, just down the road in Minneapolis. And she tagged the CEO, and the CEO like tried to contact me, but you know, like we're not friends on Facebook, so her message went into some weird file, and I did not receive that at the time. But this is amazing. That very same day that I posted that, okay, this is just uncanny. The senior acquisitions editor of that same press, of Fortress Press, was 1,000 miles from his house. And he was seated just like this, like on a stage at a writer's conference. And it was like about how to publish, how to do Christian publishing, you know, because he's an editor. And he was seated right next to all other authors and an agent. And my face appears on his phone while they're on a break, you know, with this picture. And he's like, Jacqueline Bussie, wow, I wonder who her agent is. So he turns to the agent that he's sitting next to. And he's like, do you know her? Like, do you know who Jacqueline Bussie's agent is? And it was my agent. Right? Like, right? So crazy, so beautiful, so, it's like mind-blowingly beautiful. And my agent was like, what is that picture? And what has she done now? You know, but then, everything's digital these days. He just, right then and there, you know, they said, do you have a book for sale? And he's like, well, we don't have it, but this other press has it if you wanted to help us buy it back. And so he sends it to him. The post had only been out for 2 hours before it reached him. And by 24 hours, like the next day by 1 o'clock, they had made an offer to help me buy it back. Yeah, a generous offer. Not the whole amount. We still lost a lot of money, my husband and I, but I like to say that's an integrity tax. That's a good reminder that integrity will cost us. And I am totally okay with that debt. So that's how the book exists now. And thanks to my new publisher.
Wow.
For that. Yeah.
I don't know that there are a lot of books that have that intense of a story. That's
I know,
incredible.
right?
That's incredible.
Exactly.
You know, I want to open it up, and just as you have questions, either in-house or online, make sure if you're in-house, raise your hand, and we'll have somebody hand you a mic, because we want this to happen.
Me too.
And then I'll, you know, and Chris will wave me down from the back if as he gets it. But maybe just for starters, I mean, I read the book a few weeks ago, and you write about love. It's like you're describing a piece of art, and it's short of experiencing it firsthand. Like the only thing we have is metaphors and symbolic language. So what was it like in the actual writing of this book?
Yeah, it was like prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like it was a balm, I think. You know, I'm one of those people, I don't really know what I really believe or think until I write it. Like, things actually come to me. And I'm kind of a writer's nerd. So the space where I was writing the book, I put little Post-it notes up, you know, because I'm an extrovert, and like sitting alone all day is so depressing. It's really hard for me to sit alone like that. But you have to do it, because if I talk to you, then I won't talk to the page, and I need to talk to the page to write the book. And so I wrote these notes that I got from other, you know, authors who had taught me how to complete a project like this. And one of them had said in her book, she's like, you know, when you're a writer, you need to be a straw. And so I had written this thing on my wall. I wrote, "Be the straw." And the way I interpret that is for me, it means God, but it could, if you don't believe in God, it could just mean that the universe, you know, but that God wants certain things to be spoken. You know, there's certain stories, they need to be told. They need to be out in the world, you know? And so you're not the creator of them so much as you're the conduit for them. Like, they're coming to you, you're just the straw. You know, I know that sounds weird, but the world is really thirsty. Right? The world is thirsty for love without limits. I'm parched most of the time. How about you? You know, you watch the news, oh gosh, Twitter, don't even get me started, right?
Yeah, it's blood sport out there.
It's a blood sport.
Yeah.
But writing is a bit of a blood sport too.
Yeah.
You know, because you really, really have to be willing, I think, to be a straw. Yeah. And that's not always easy. You know, I had a lot of tears went into this book. And it's funny when people say to me, like, which parts made them cry. I didn't really mean to make people cry that much, but people have been writing to me that I don't even know. They're like, I was sobbing on this. I do some lists in the book of, like, things my mother taught me about love. I sobbed nonstop writing that. And that came to me straight. I feel like that came to me from my mother somehow. Yeah, and everyone's like, I sobbed reading that. And I'm like, well... There's the old saying, no tears in the author, no tears in the reader. And I think that's true.
So as a prayer, you're like a straw.
Yeah.
Just to paraphrase, at one point you write, and kind of butchering it in some respects, but you'll know that your agape love is as big as God wants when you ultimately offend people. And just what is so offensive about limitless love?
Yeah. Well, I guess first I'll just say we can clearly see how offensive it is, right? Given what's happened. I mean, personally for me, you know, as a follower of Jesus, when I think about how Jesus offended people, I mean, people wanted to kill Jesus. This is for a reason. Yeah. You know, we think of love as this like foofy little, peachy little, you know, like flower. When
unicorns
really,
and rainbows.
Yeah, right. Yes. Like rainbows and Skittles. You know, no, right? You know, it's really, really a multi-grain bread that not a lot of people want to eat. You know, so yeah, you know. Right, it's pretty hardcore and really, really good for you, but you still don't want it. Yeah, so I just feel like, I think what's offensive about it is we know in our heart of hearts that this is what the world needs. We know it's what God wants. But some people, it's just so hard, isn't it? It's just so hard to love people with whom we disagree or who are just so different than us. In the book, one of the things I say is like, you know, loving people that we like is so easy. It feels like slipping on your most comfortable pair of jeans. But loving people we don't like feels like trying to put a pair of baby Gap jeans on a hippo. This is true, you know? Like, it's really, really hard. And so our mind, even though we wouldn't say it out loud, maybe we want to make exceptions to love. Because it's just too offensive to think that, oh, but that person, look at what they do. And so it's very, I think, we have a lot of double standards, which is not good.
I'm going to keep asking questions unless you'll raise your hands. But,
oh, please. I know you're not that shy. Look at you. Oh, there's one. Yay.
Hey, so thank you very much for coming here. It's really nice to see you. I enjoyed your book very much. In particular, I really appreciated that you wrote about self-love. I think that gets missed a lot.
Yes.
And the balance that is, and especially about how Christian messages about love sound to people who might have come from a position of less than, someone who's experienced abuse, how it sounds from a gender lens. I think that's really helpful.
Yes.
The thing I was wondering as I was reading about that, though, is, you know, some of the traditional messages around, you know, you are the sort of messages meant for maybe powerful people that they should be less. I often find people who seem to be arrogant, or even people in a powerful position, I often get the sense that they're there because they actually do carry a really deep shame. I'm not sure who those messages are good for. I was just sort of curious what your experience is from that side of it.
Yeah, I appreciate your comment and the question, because I think it's very compassionate, right? To see that most people carry around deep wounds and scars, and they may act like they think they're more than, but so many of us carry the scars of less than. Like, we're wearing that name tag, you know? And it's impossible for me to say, you know, what name tag a certain person is wearing, you know? But I do think that power differentials in our society are a real thing. Some people, myself included, you know, have more power and more privilege, you know? And I don't think that privilege needs to be such a negative all the time. I think if you are willing enough to say that you have it, then you need to start using it, right? I mean, so it's something you can use for the good of those around you who maybe don't have as much, right? So given that it's hard to sort of get rid of privilege, although I will tell you this, when you stand in solidarity with folks who maybe have less privilege than you, you're going to lose yours too. And that's an important lesson. So I'm trying to think about how to answer your question, and it's a little tricky, right? So that being said about the power, I guess the one thing I would want to say, everyone has scars and everyone has wounds. But I also think we have to address the issue that some people do have more power. Some people do get more in life of, you are loved, you know, you are worthy of love. You're not less than. I think that's real. Like, for example, I think that for me as a white person, I get a lot of, you're a worthy person. You know, you're beloved, like you deserve dignity. People of color don't always have that. And I talk about that in the book, you know, because they've taught me that, and I need to listen to that. And so those things are real too, right? Some people are taught to have more pride than others. The sort of Christian teaching on pride in the chapter that she's referencing, I go after it pretty hard. Like, I chase it down and wrestle it to the ground, because I was always taught, you know, C.S. Lewis is such a famous author, and he's like, pride is the greatest sin. He actually says that in Mere Christianity, which is still a bestseller in the world. And it's like, okay, well, for some people, pride, if I had a lot of self-love to begin with, too much pride, that's a problem. But what if I hate myself? What if I'm in an abusive relationship? What if I'm a person who is oppressed, or, you know, shoved into the shadows, as many people are in our society? Maybe I need more pride and not less, because people are not giving me that love, right? As a whole. Sure, my people might be, but not society. And so those are just important distinctions to make. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all teaching about pride, right? But I appreciate the compassion of saying, yeah, I think a lot of people who are walking around like that, they carry wounds too, and probably need the message just as much. So.
Now, I was surprised in the chapter that you're talking about with regard to pride. You mentioned that you were teaching a class, and the Christian students in your class, they all agreed.
Yeah. Pride
was the biggest sin.
They did. Yeah.
And I had never heard such things. I was not aware.
You're lucky. You're free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was that a surprise to you, or was that just like, oh, of course, that's...
It wasn't a surprise so much. You know, I mean, I taught a class on C.S. Lewis. That was a class on C.S. Lewis. And so we had just read that chapter in Mere Christianity. Yeah. And no one questioned it. And I just wanted them to question it. But they're smart, because then when I really kept pushing, you know, I tell the story in the chapter, I'm like, but can you think of an example of where somebody being told that you know, pride is evil and pride is sin always, which is C.S. Lewis's teaching. There's no qualification to it. It's always sin. Can you think of an example where that's bad? And my amazing student raised her hand, and she was like, well, I could see that if you were really depressed or you were in an abusive relationship, and she used herself as an example, and she's like, or if you were suicidal, that'd be the worst possible thing anyone could say to you. And I was like, you got it. And you know, it was a feminist theology that first came up with that idea, came up with that criticism, you know, of that ancient teaching. So, yeah.
You know, at one point you say, in our day, to call people and things by their right names is the new radicalism. And that's another idea I had not thought of. And could you say more about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, think about what we call things or what we call people. You know, I don't know about you, but the phrase illegal alien, I mean, we're talking about people. Like these terms, they're just really troubling to me, you know, as a person and as a Christian. And so in that chapter, I just talk about, has anyone here ever been called by the wrong name? Someone mispronounce your name? Someone call you the name you don't go by? Yeah, how's that feel? Somebody answer. Yeah, rough, not good, crappy, exactly. It feels awful, okay? So I use an experience of people call me by the wrong name all the time. And I kind of use that to say, people like, I will introduce myself, this is without fail, I introduce myself as Jacqueline, and 2 minutes later they're like, hey Jackie, right, you know? And when I was a kid, I let people do it, even though I didn't want to be called by that name, because I hadn't quite figured out that your name is something you got to claim for yourself. So I let people call me by the wrong name all the time, and my grandma called me by a totally different name, so I tell all that story. But I'm just trying to get to the point that names matter, and they matter a lot. And I really love how, you know, in Scripture, God notices that names matter. Think about how many times in Scripture someone's name changes because they have a whole new identity. And it made me think about, you know, I have a friend who's trans. And my trans friend was teaching me that the name that he had when he had a different gender identity was, you know, not the right name. And he calls that, he said, in trans culture, we call that our dead name. Like, what was the name that we were given? And he had a whole new name. And he was like, I only go by this name. I'm not even going to tell you my dead name. I'm like, oh, see how powerful that is? Like, names are sacred. Like, our self is caught up in our names. And I do think that it's radical, because if we start calling things different, it makes a difference. So I talk about a lot of my friends in the book who live in Fargo-Moorhead and who are what I like to call, and what they prefer to be called, new Americans. New Americans. But on my first day of teaching, even this year, my students were like, and I was like, do you know what a new American is? And they were like, not really. And I was like, immigrants and refugees is what we call them. But those are words that are very laden, right? But immigrants and refugees are new Americans. You know, like, that's what they are. And so just listen to, you know, this is what I want to play with, this idea that I do get, you know, from faith, that names really matter, and they're radical.
And that's where our, like as you said, our identity, and you look at Scripture, I think so. The name means something very specific. It means something. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah. So one of the things that is going around is you use kind of faith, Bible, Jesus talk to make the point that love has no limits. It's very clear from the book. But why do we need to work so hard to convince Jesus followers about this limitless love?
I know. It's a great question. I don't know. It seems like the biggest paradox of all time, doesn't it? So that's why I really appreciate this question. So thank you to whoever had asked that online. We shouldn't have to. We should not have to. This is a book that I wish that someday, I hope actually someday, that it will be useless. That you could just put it in a dumpster fire, you know, because I shouldn't even have to write this, you know? But we know that we do. I mean, we know that we have to tell these stories, and I just encourage everybody, you know, who's here tonight or anyone who's listening, you have to tell your stories of love without limits because they matter. And the other thing is, people are trying to get you to not tell them. Why is that? Ask yourself. That means that the people in power who want us to not tell those stories, those people know that those stories have the power to change people. That's why they don't want you to tell it. Or otherwise they'd be like, fine, go ahead and tell whatever you want. So never underestimate the power of your story. You know, if I knew how to change all the hearts in the world, I'd do it, right? Wish we had magic wands. But in the meantime, I think we just need to keep telling our stories. So your story matters, tell it.
Oh, we do not hear any more questions. Oh, it's just dying.
They're making you do all the work, Dave.
I know. You guys got to try hard. You try harder next time.
Yeah. I love you without limits anyway.
You know, you write about this, about the messy ambiguity and complexity of life. But many want to pretend it's black and white. Is our inability to acknowledge that two things can be true at the same time at the core of a limited kind of love?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I've always appreciated the quote from G.K. Chesterton where he said, you know what a paradox is? It's just the truth standing on her head trying to get your attention. And a paradox is that, you know, two contradictory things that are both true at the same time. And I feel like as a Christian, and particularly as a Lutheran, I feel enabled to embrace paradox rather than just to reject it out of hand. I feel like the truth about life is it's a both and, you know? It's both stellar and really crappy, or another word that starts with S that I won't say. You know, life is just so many things all at one time, right? So I feel if we could get more in touch with that both and nature of ourselves and in the both and nature of life and of other people, you know, it's really hard to accept that someone who has really hurt us very badly might be an amazing person in other people's minds. And the flip side of that is also so hard for us, right? That a person who's always been really great to me could have done this really awful thing. Instead, we go straight to, they're totally incapable of doing that. They would never do that. They would never hurt someone like that. They can't do that. And it's like, yeah, that kind of forgets that everyone is a saint and a sinner, which is a core tenet of Lutheran theology. And I appreciate it because it's teaching me that about myself and about other people. And if I'm going to extend mercy and grace to myself, I have to extend that to you. I have to extend that to the people, quite frankly, most of the time I don't want to extend it to.
In the limits and the lines that you draw, that I draw, that we all draw, we don't want to do that.
We don't want to do that.
But none of us are flat characters.
No.
In this story.
3D.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. We need to put on our 3D glasses, see one another.
Nice. It looks like. Oh, okay.
Number 2, okay.
Apparently,
we have a request.
Here comes number 2.
Okay. Special request.
So yeah, so this book is absolutely a case study on love, and you were asked to cut the parts out about your LGBTQ friends and your Muslim friends.
Yep.
It scandalized the original publisher. So where have you been scandalized by love and made aware of limits that you've drawn?
Oh, God's doing to me that every day, right? That's happening to me every day, that I'm always like figuring out. So a lot of the book, you should know, if you haven't read it, it contains epic fails of my own epic fails to love without limits. I am not good at it, and that's why I vow to keep trying, okay? So I think it's important to share our epic fails of love without limits. And so, do you want me to share one?
Go for it.
You want me to share one?
Do you want to share it?
Well, they're horribly embarrassing. They're very bad. But I think it's important, you know, to share them maybe for that reason. So I'll just share one. These are hard to tell in public. It's easier to write it when you don't have to see me. So there was this camp in the North Carolina mountains that my husband and I went to one summer, a lot of years back. And we loved it. You know, it's the perfect kind of thing where you hike and you ride bikes and you ride horses and you pray together and eat meals together. And it would have been really wonderful that summer if it hadn't been for a certain family, the Batsons, I'll call them. Well, the Batsons, they were a family that jumped up and down on my last nerve that summer. They had 2 little kids, and they were as cute as could be. But they were like cougar cubs on cocaine. They ran around. They would you'd be trying to take your tray back to the kitchen. They headbutt you and it was a lot. And they never sat down. I was like, these kids, they're not even sitting during mealtimes. They're running around and pulling on you and everything. And I was like, wow. And the worst part, though, was we would always have this, thing in the evenings where we would have a worship service out in the woods. And it was that part of the day that you just so looked forward to at camp. And it was the quieting down time. And we kind of felt like every night it felt a little ruined, right? Because the kids were running around and screaming, and they would never sit down or sing the hymns. And I should be clear, they were 5 and 6 years old. And we felt that they acted like they were 2 or 3, and we're like, gosh, can't their parents do something? Can't they rein them in? Oh, man. So I was totally righteous. What a mistake. So this one day, I was leading this Bible study, and I was just saying something like, God always knows what's going on with you. God knows your story even when other people don't. And so the mom of these 2 kids, these 2 little girls, comes up to me and she's like, that's just like my little girls. And I'm like, what? I think I'm so open-minded. I'm like, oh yeah, people have a story. You got to understand that. But I didn't think of children as having a 5 and 6-year-old as having a story, which shows you how epically I fail at love sometimes. So she starts telling me the story. She's like, well, Annie and Maddie, they are biological sisters, but we adopted them when they were 2 and 3. And their parents were drug addicts who made it a habit to just travel across the Carolinas, from motel to motel. And when they wanted to go on a bender, for a few days at a time, this was their answer. They didn't want to be bogged down by childcare or the cost of childcare. So they would strap the 2 little girls into their car seats in their hotel room. Oh yeah. And leave them there for 2 or 3 days at a time. And in order that they would not starve to death, they would pop 2 little bottles with each car seat. And just leave them there, unsupervised for days. And Justine was saying to me, she said, the thing was that Annie, because she was younger, she figured out how to feed herself. These kids are survivors, she was like, they figured out how to feed themselves, but the younger one could not figure out how to burp herself. It's not humanly possible, right, for a baby that's too small to get rid of the gas, right? Babies need burped. We all know this. They're so uncomfortable otherwise. So this little girl, Annie, she was a survivor. She taught herself how to drink the bottle, but then she would get the gas, so she taught herself how to throw up every time after she ate. And Justine continues with the story. She's like, so Jacqueline, that's why my children, they can't stand to ever be tied in a chair. They just can't stand to sit down. I can't even really get them in a car seat. It's so difficult to even come here, because of all this. And you can imagine, I was like, if a person could drown in their own shame, I would be dead. for how I had judged them, you know? And so we just have to remember always, and I use this to say the point that, and I'm quoting a famous philosopher on this point, an enemy is only a person whose story you don't yet know. Just remember that.
And you experienced this at this camp,
I did.
And you realized, you know, where you had drawn a line. Then how do you extend yourself grace? How do you extend yourself the love in the aftermath of that?
Yeah, I think because of you, you know, because you let me tell it. Hopefully you won't judge me forever, you know. I think that that's how we extend each other grace, is not by pretending that we're perfect or that we love without limits all the time, but by saying, you know what, I'm really not very good at this, but if we all got together and tried harder, we could do better. We could hold one another accountable. And personally, as a teacher, I think when I tell my students the truth about that, and that was actually from a sermon I just preached at Concordia College, you know, when the book came out, on the day it came out, I preached that sermon, and I told several stories like that. Then I feel like people who are younger than us, they're able to say, oh, you know what? I've done that too, and I have to extend myself grace, or that person, I need to go back to them and apologize. And several of the things that happened when I was writing this book, I was struck with how awful I had been. And I actually found people. I didn't find Gus Tate. Which is so bad. He is like not on social media. He is unfindable, which is so depressing. But I'm really hoping that someone's going to find him and they're going to write to me and it's going to be amazing. But I did find one friend that I, you know, like this friend I was just talking about, that I had epically failed, and no one had ever heard from her since high school, and I think we had shunned her. And I thought, you know, I need to reach out to her because I used to have not very accepting views at all about LGBTQ, you know, people. And I'm very ashamed of that now. It's something I'm ashamed of, but by writing, I'm able to heal from that shame and share it. And one of the things that happened though was like, I need to find her. I was writing about how I'd hurt her, you know, by not understanding where she was coming from and by just, you know, buying into the Christianity I'd always heard growing up. And I found her. And she forgave me, and I tell that story. It's like a postscript in the book. I'm like, and I found her. And sure enough, you know, she's married to a woman very happily, and I actually had dinner with her not too long ago.
Fantastic.
And it was really beautiful.
Yeah,
so other people extend us grace, I think.
Exactly. Looks like Chris has a question.
Yeah, so we got another one online. Thinking back to that story from just a couple minutes ago, how do you think we can best apply this idea of love without limits? How can we engage in real conversation and relationship with people who have experienced something really challenging or trauma? What tools can we use to bring those stories out so we can understand better?
Yeah, we have got to listen. We have got to create a space for people's laments. You know, we've got to sit down with people who are different from us. And I know that sucks. You know, if you're like me, your holiday dinner table is like tumultuous. You know, it's so scary. Somebody's always going to be outraged. We have to try to have some of those conversations is what I'm going to say to you. And if you can't always have those conversations about the things that are controversial, challenge yourself to find a shared humanity with that person. This is what I do lately. When people are talking, you know, I think that my instinct when someone is saying things that I absolutely disagree with, what's happening in my head is this. Like, I'm just reloading. Like, I just can't wait for them. I can't wait for them to stop talking so I can, like, fire back. Like, you know, this is very violent, you know? So instead, lately, what I do, and it you know, admittedly, it takes all of my self-control. But seriously, while they're talking, I'll be like, okay, why do you believe that so strongly? And it gets back to your point, your excellent question from before. Because I would say 9 times out of 10, that person's got some story, right? Again, not maybe a story I would embrace all aspects of, but it is a true story. And you listen to it and you're like, okay. Well, let me tell you why I believe the opposite of that, because I've got a story too. So my students and I, when we do interfaith studies, we actually prepare our story. You know, we have to be good storytellers. We have to work at this. Like, we set timers, and we're like, in 3 minutes, you know, talk about your religious identity in a way that you could easily share that with someone, and why you're so passionate about it, you know, in a way that we can share it. So I think that's some of the things that we have to do, right? We have to be willing to not only, you know, love across them, you got to talk across difference. You got to search for that shared humanity. And I don't care if it's just that person once, you know, like ate at the same pizza restaurant as you. Find something. Like, there has to be something that you can see about them, and then challenge yourself to say it out loud. This is another thing I do with my students. When it's really getting heated, you know, and people are really disagreeing, I'll be like, stop. I'll say, okay. Sorry, am I losing my mic? Okay, just making sure. I'll say, okay, stop, and so, you have to say what she just said in terms that she would understand. And then they try to do it, and of course they didn't listen closely enough. We don't listen closely enough, and then there's laughter, you know, kind of breaks the tension, and that person will be like, that's not what I said. That's not what I said, you know, and here's what I said, and then we start again. So being able to actually just compassionately articulate someone else's perspective, even when it is not your own, is already a huge milestone. And that's not that you agree with it. And then my final point on this would be always remembering the distinction that has existed for all time between understanding and agreement. They are not the same. And I guarantee you that every one of you amazing humans in this room loves somebody that you do not agree with on 100% of everything. So you are capable of this. You can do this. Love demands only understanding, not agreement. I can understand you even though I disagree.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm also hearing something of what you're saying about just the need for boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, love is not Skittles and unicorns, and it also
it's not.
Needs boundaries.
It does need boundaries.
Yeah, sometimes we need to love from a distance.
We do. This is also true too. We have to really care about the safety of some of us and our brothers and sisters, and I mean that in the widest sense. And one of the things I do say in the book, I'm speaking about abusive relationships, which is the kind of home I grew up in, is that a love without limits does not mean a life without limits. I don't think those are the same. Yeah. There's a lot of ways to love people, but because love, I compare love to a chandelier. Like, love is not a rug that you walk on, right? That's we want to walk on people, and that's wrong. Love is a chandelier, and if it's a chandelier, it casts light on everyone in the room, and that includes you. And that means sometimes we have to practice self-love, coming back to the previous discussion. Yeah. And that might mean that we have to leave. And I think that's okay too, because otherwise you're excluded. Then the exception is you. Like, what about love for yourself? When people are abusing us or hurting us in a way that is just unacceptable, robbing us of our dignity, we have a right to dignity as well. Yeah. So we have to have limits.
Good. I just see a question up here in the front.
Yay!
So your story about you and Gus, and the fact of, like, children are without limits in lots of ways, right?
Right.
So in this context of the world seems so foreboding, and how we want to nurture children in this world of love without limits, could you speak to a couple of things from yourself personally that you would connect as good guiding thoughts that we can be doing as adults? Because I mean, this book is written a lot for adults, right? Because kids can do this in such a natural way that we cannot. So if you could speak a little bit to how we can, as adults, be sure that we're curating an environment and what we could be doing and how we're enlisted in order to help continue that.
Enlisted. What a beautiful question, and what a beautiful word that you use. Like, we are enlisted. We're the enlisted, everyone. No, I love that. Well, one of the things that I think is actually backed up by research and by my experience, which is that when we have the chance to meet somebody who's different, right? And we develop a friendship with them, which is so important, I think, for our children. You know, like, if you have a Muslim friend, or maybe you're not that close with them, invite them over. Let your children meet them and their kids. that will change them for a lifetime. When people develop friendships, all the social science research has proven that when people have one friend of another faith, their entire view of that faith changes towards the positive. Now, 7 out of 10 Americans don't know a Muslim. Right there's your problem. Right? They can't, there's a single story being told about Muslims, and that is what? If I say the word Muslim, what do most people think of? Just play word association with me for 1 second. There you go. See how easy that was? That's terrible. That's a single story that can perpetuate itself because people don't have Muslim friends. You know, like I introduce, readers and my students to Muslims. Like my class actually goes out and we work with new Americans weekly because that will change you. And then you should see by the end of the semester, nobody is able to just stand on that one, whatever stereotype or media soundbite that they were living off of. Because they'll be like, well, that's not actually true for my friend Jasmine. I mean, she was saying that, she wears the headscarf, which is actually true for one of my friends in the story. She wears the headscarf because she's a feminist. Just totally true story of like a student who came, Hannah, I don't think you were in that class, but you were in that class. Oh my gosh, isn't that beautiful? Like one of my former students is here tonight, which like makes me so, so happy. She was there. I'm telling the truth, aren't I? This amazing, amazing friend of mine, I brought the friend to the class because I'm like, we're not just gonna talk about Islam like an abstraction. You know what Islam is? It's 1.6 billion people, and a lot of them are our neighbors, and all of them are our brothers and sisters. So let's meet them, and let's talk it out, right? And she stood there, she wears the veil, wears the headscarf, wears hijab, and she was like, yeah, I wear this because I'm a feminist, and I don't want people at work. She works at Sanford Health. She's like, I don't want people at work judging me, like, for my looks or for the size of my chest. She's like, I want them judging me for my character. We're all like, wow, and I have heard so many Muslims say that. Like, that's not even uncommon. That is completely common for Muslim American women to be like, I wear this head covering not because I have to, duh. I don't have to, but because it's part of my taking a stand as a woman and being a feminist. So, introducing people. I think if we're going to be curators, if we're going to be the enlisted has got to be diverse, And so many people, I just think it's so important. My friend, she's got children, and it's just so beautiful. She always invites like our gay friends over to like hang out with her kids. That's powerful. And she's like, oh yeah, this is Brian and Bob. They're a couple. Her kids are like 6. Think of that, and they just think that is the most normal thing in the world. Like that's always existed. They love them. They play soccer. And I just sit there watching, I'm like, oh yeah, that's how you change the world right there. Friendship. Transgressive friendships, which is a term from Brian McLaren that I love. Friendship is the most subversive thing we've got going. Just bring friends over for your kids. I had a Jewish friend growing up. Changed my whole life, I think.
Changing the world with friendship and love seems like a great place to land. Yeah. But I'll give you the last word. What else should we hear about? What else should we know? What do you want to leave us with here?
I'm going to leave you with just a super short thing that I wanted to share with you. So I made the story, the Facebook post now is part of the book. In case you were wondering. I feel like it became part of the book's life to tell it, so the front page of the book is now the story of me with the duct tape. So it's become part of the book's life. But at the end of the book, then I actually tell the story of how my amazing Facebook squad managed to sell the book. And I say that taught me 6 things about hope. I had lost hope, and I see now that was wrong, but those amazing people gave it back to me. And just you turning up tonight, it also gives me back hope. So thank you so much for that. So if you just give me like 1 minute, I'll just read to you the 6 things that I learned from this whole experience about hope. Number 1, your story matters. Tell it. Number 2, Cornel West was right. Now more than ever, what the world needs most is more people who are not for sale. Number 3, never, never cave to the lie that you can't make a difference. Even a click or a share can jumpstart a heart. Number 4, At times, you may feel powerless. Yes. But you're not. The power to tell the tale of why you feel powerless and who made you feel powerless never leaves you. Number 5, hope is a map. If you ever lose yours, you can always share mine. What matters is that we all find our way home. And last but not least, number 6, hope wins always. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Just a few words in closing. To learn more about Jacqueline, visit her website, JacquelineBusty.com, where you can follow, participate in her work. While you're at it, buy her book. Lots of them. And I did check, it is only 93 days until Christmas. That's a real number.
Still 93.
So yeah,
wow,
still 93.
Impressive.
We can wait a few hours, it'll be 92. The clock's ticking. The video of tonight's conversation and past episodes in the Sandbox are available along with discussion questions. So you can take the video of tonight. We'll have discussion questions posted soon for this, but we have all of the other ones. They're up there. You can download a discussion guide, get together with your friends, a small group, and just have this as a resource. Also, make sure to check out our podcast, the Sandbox Cooperative Podcast. We release it twice a month, and it's the audio form of the podcast, so just subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform that you choose. And we're also actively looking to build this community through Sandbox Cooperative, and it's always better when you're a part of it. So we love hearing from you, so stay in the conversation. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you can also visit us at sandboxcooperative.com. And we heard Carrie mention it earlier. The Sandbox Cooperative is a resource that's completely supported through grants and financial gifts. So if you'd like to support us in developing this resource, you hit the donate tab on our website, or if you're in-house, Grandpa's old hat is still sitting over there, and you can leave a contribution there. Thanks for your generosity. Please share the good word about tonight and what we're up to. Share the word about Jacqueline and her work. And we hope to see you again soon. And thanks for being a part of the night. And thanks again, Jacqueline. And Jacqueline will be here to sign the books and connect with her afterwards. Yeah. Get some more food, hang out. And for everybody at home, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.